A 12-year-old boy, chased through the streets by relentless bullies, found himself on a stranger's porch, knocking for help. When Clint Eastwood stepped out, the night took an unforgettable turn. No one knew he shouldn't have taken the shortcut, but he had no choice. The moment the last bell rang, he had bolted out of the school doors, backpacks slamming against his shoulders. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the laughter behind him. They were coming. He didn't have to look back to know it was them, Ricky and his crew. They always found a reason to mess with him. If it wasn't his clothes, it was his shoes. If it wasn't his shoes, it was his lunch. And if they were bored, they'd just make something up. Today, it was his mom. "Yo, Noah. Your mom working late again? Maybe she finally realized you're a waste of space." Ricky had sneered at him in the cafeteria, loud enough for half the lunchroom to hear. Noah had ignored it, like always, but ignoring them never made them stop. So here he was running. He cut across the empty lot behind the gas station, his sneakers kicking up dust as he sprinted toward the neighborhood on the other side. His usual route home was a straight shot down Birch Street, but that was the first place they'd check. Instead, he veered right into unfamiliar territory. The sun was setting now, stretching his shadow long across the cracked pavement. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but the sound of sneakers slapping against asphalt behind him pushed him forward. A rusted chain-link fence loomed ahead, cutting off the alley. Noah didn't think. He jumped. His fingers scraped against metal as he pulled himself up, legs flailing. Just as he swung his foot over the top, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You're dead, Noah." Something yanked at his pant leg, Ricky's grip. For a terrifying second, Noah teetered, his whole body weight hanging between escape and disaster. Then, rip. The fabric tore, and he tumbled over the other side, crashing onto the pavement. Pain shot through his arm, but he scrambled up, ignoring it. The alley dumped him onto a quiet residential ST. Rows of old houses stood in the dim glow of porch lights, silent and still. No kids playing outside, no car engines humming, no signs of Ricky and his crew. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was nothing but his own ragged breathing. Noah staggered forward, gripping his scraped elbow. His legs trembled, the adrenaline finally wearing off. He knew he couldn't go home yet, not with them still lurking. He needed a place to hide. His eyes darted around, scanning the porches, the driveways, the houses. Then he saw it. A small, unassuming home with a wooden porch, the kind of place that felt safe. He hesitated only for a moment before stepping up to the door. His hand hovered over the knocker. His chest tightened. What if they didn't answer? What if they told him to leave? But then, from somewhere behind him, he heard a voice. "Hey, I see you, Noah." Panic slammed into his chest. He didn't have time to think anymore. He knocked hard, and then he waited. But the person who opened the door was the last person he expected. The door groaned as it swung open. Noah barely had time to catch his breath before his eyes traveled up, way up to the figure standing before him. The man in the doorway was old, but not frail. His shoulders were broad, his stance relaxed yet firm. Deep lines etched his face like time had carved them with a careful hand. But it was his eyes that froze Noah in place. They weren't just watching him, they were measuring him. The boy swallowed hard. Nothing came out. His voice had abandoned him. The man said nothing, just stared, one brow lifting slightly as if waiting for an explanation. Behind him the house was dimly lit, but Noah could make out shelves lined with books, a sturdy leather chair in the corner, and an old wooden table that looked like it had seen more than its fair share of years. Noah licked his lips, forcing the words out. I just need a place to hide for a second, please." The man didn't move, didn't even blink. Noah could feel his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. What if this was a mistake? What if he was about to get yelled at or worse, sent right back outside to Ricky and his gang? But then movement. The man's hand reached for the door frame, gripping it lightly, like he was making a decision. Then, with a slow nod, he stepped aside. Noah hesitated just for a second before stepping inside. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. The man walked past him, settling into a chair in the corner. He didn't say a word, just gestured to a worn-out couch across from him. Noah sat down carefully, his backpack still clutched to his chest. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. His eyes darted around the room. Movie posters framed photos, a few awards on the shelves. There was something familiar about the man, but Noah couldn't place it. Finally, the man leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice when he spoke was low and gravelly, carrying the weight of years. "Who are you running from, kid?" Noah blinked. He wasn't expecting that. Not "what are you doing here?" Not "where are your parents?" Just "who are you running from?" For some reason, that made it harder to answer. Noah exhaled shakily. "Some guys from school. They won't leave me alone." He stared at the floor. "I didn't know where else to go." The man studied him for a long moment, fingers laced together. Then finally, "You know who I am?" Noah frowned. His eyes flicked to the framed photos again, scanning them more carefully. And then his stomach dropped. The squint, the jawline, the way he sat, like nothing in the world could shake him, his breath caught in his throat. "You're Clint Eastwood." The man didn't confirm it, didn't deny it, just held his gaze. Noah's hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. He suddenly felt small, like he had just walked into the wrong room, the wrong house, the wrong life. Clint finally leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're lucky it was me who answered," he said. "Could have been someone who wouldn't have cared." Noah's face burned. He knew that. He knew knocking on a stranger's door was reckless. Stupid even. But what choice did he have? Clint must have seen something in his expression because his voice softened. "You hungry?" Noah hadn't thought about it until now, but the second Clint said it, his stomach twisted with hunger. He nodded, a little embarrassed. Clint stood up, moving toward the kitchen without another word. Noah sat there, his brain still trying to catch up. He had come here running for his life. And now he was sitting in Clint Eastwood's house like it was the most normal thing in the world. But something told him this night was about to get a lot stranger. The smell of something sizzling in a pan drifted from the kitchen. It wasn't fancy, just eggs and toast. But to Noah, it smelled like home. His mother barely had time to cook with her late shifts, so dinner was usually whatever he could find in the fridge. Clint moved slowly but deliberately, like a man who didn't waste energy on things that didn't matter. He cracked the eggs with practiced ease, flipped the toast in the pan, and slid everything onto a plate before setting it down in front of Noah. No words, no questions. Just eat. Noah didn't hesitate. He dug in, realizing only now how empty his stomach was. Clint sat across from him, sipping black coffee from a mug that looked older than Noah himself. For a while, the only sound was the quiet clink of Noah's fork against the plate. Then Clint finally spoke. "Tell me about these kids." Noah swallowed, staring at the table. "They've been after me for months. Doesn't matter what I do. If I ignore them, they push harder. If I talk back, it gets worse." He shook his head. "I don't even know why they picked me." Clint studied him, his expression unreadable. Then he set his coffee down and leaned forward. "You afraid of them?" Noah hesitated. He wanted to say no, to act tough. But the truth was already sitting in the room. "Yeah," he admitted. Clint nodded like he already knew the answer. "Fear's not the problem, kid. It's what you do with it." Noah frowned, picking at the crust of his toast. "I don't get it." Clint leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Fear is like a dog. If you run, it chases you. But if you stand still, look it in the eye, and show it you're not prey, it backs off." Noah let that sink in. He wanted to believe that. But he wasn't Clint Eastwood. He wasn't some cowboy in an old movie. He was just a kid. But what if they don't back off? Clint's eyes darkened just a little. "Then you make him." Noah felt his chest tighten. The idea of standing up to Ricky, to all of them, felt impossible. Every time he tried, they just laughed in his face. "I've tried," he muttered. "Doesn't work." Clint studied him for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to a shelf near the door, and pulled something off it. He turned back and tossed it onto the table with a quiet thud. Noah blinked. It was a thick old leather belt, the kind worn by men who had seen things, done things. The metal buckle was scratched. The leather cracked with age. Clint sat back down, tapping a finger against it. "You know what this is?" Noah swallowed.
A belt.
Clint smirked.
Just barely.
It's my father's belt. And when I was your age, I had a Ricky of my own. Noah's breath caught in his throat. You got bullied? Clint nodded slowly. There was a kid named Lenny. Mean as hell. Made my life miserable every chance he got. He tapped the belt again. One day I got tired of running. So I walked into my old man's room and took this. Not to fight, just to feel like I had something, like I wasn't empty-handed anymore. Noah stared at the belt. He could almost see it. Young Clint standing in front of a mirror, gripping that leather strap like a shield. What happened? Noah asked. Clint exhaled, his fingers resting against his coffee mug. I stopped looking at Lenny like he was bigger than me. That's all it took. I carried this belt in my backpack for a week. Never had to use it. Just knowing I had it. That was enough. Noah frowned. So, you're saying I should bring a belt to school? Clint huffed a quiet chuckle. No, kid. I'm saying you need something that makes you feel ready. It ain't about the belt. It's about the weight it carries in your mind. Noah let that settle in his head. The idea felt foreign. The thought that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. Maybe it was about believing you weren't weak. Clint leaned forward again. His voice was quiet, but firm. You decide when this ends, Noah, not them. Noah swallowed hard. The words hit in a way nothing else ever had, but would he really be able to stand his ground when it mattered? Noah sat there, his fingers drumming lightly against the table, the weight of Clint's words pressed on him. Could it really be that simple? Clint watched him for a moment before pushing his chair back and standing up.
Come with me.
Noah hesitated, but followed. They walked out the back door, onto a small open yard. The air was cool now, the last bit of sunlight fading behind the trees. Clint stepped onto the patch of dirt in the center of the yard, turning to face him. You ever thrown a punch before? Noah's stomach twisted. He shook his head. Clint smirked. Just barely. Didn't think so. He cracked his knuckles, rolling his shoulders. All right, kid, square up. Noah's eyes widened. Wait, you want me to fight you? Clint huffed a quiet laugh. No, I want you to learn something. Noah swallowed hard, but did as he was told, lifting his fists the way he'd seen guys do in movies. He felt ridiculous.